Right, and good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Pinto here with you from Phoenixville Public Library. I'm the Adult Services Director here, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this morning's presentation. We have with us two local authors who have collaborated on a new book that distills their decades of experience working in and for the nonprofit community. Louis J. Beccaria has enjoyed a professional career of 50 years spanning criminal justice, health and human services, and higher education, with 30 of those years involved in philanthropy at 3 different foundations: the Pew Charitable Trusts, the Stewart Huston Charitable Trust, and the Phoenixville Community Health Foundation. He has spent almost 40 years teaching graduate level courses and consulting in nonprofit management and grant making. Lou has received many honors and awards for community service over the course of his career. Constance Carter, CFRE, is a principal at Sylvia and Carter and Associates, a consulting firm based in Philadelphia and Westchester, PA, that provides consulting services in philanthropy, strategic planning, organizational development, and fundraising to help nonprofit organizations flourish and grow. Her experience includes 35 years in campaign management, fundraising, strategic planning, and program and organizational development. Connie has also provided merger consultation assistance for several Chester County organizations, helping to build stronger, more efficient nonprofits. So here to discuss their lessons learned and imparted in their new book, Nonprofit Excellence: Strategies for a Challenging World, a Handbook for Grantmaking and Nonprofit Leadership Skills, we welcome now Lou and Connie.
Well, thank you, Mark, for that generous introduction for both of us. And thank you all for joining the Zoom call today. I'm going to just start out with just saying, for me, why we wrote the book. For me, it was just a simple matter of, at this stage of my life and career, I wanted to give something back to the field. Also wanted to give back something to those coming behind me, that people who are new to the nonprofit field or in their younger years in the career. And the other reason is I like to write. So I just gave it another try. This is my second book. And collaborating with Connie, and I'm not saying this just because she's on here, but has a wonderful, wonderful experience, and wouldn't mind doing it again, because it's been a good 2.5 years or so that we've been working on the book, and it's been very, very pleasurable. So, so that's for me. That's why I written the book, and looking forward to the questions that people might have, and we'll get into discussing a few of the essays and why we wrote those.
Yeah, and I'd just like to sort of add on to what Lou said, in the sense of the reason that I was so intrigued about this collaboration with Lou and wanting to do this is, as you all know, after years working in the nonprofit sector, you see all kinds of stuff. And I had worked many years as a staff person at various nonprofits. But then when I started my own consulting business, which I've had now for over 15 years, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure to work with over 100 different organizations, many of them in Chester County and some brought further afield. And I had just seen so many odd things, interesting things, successful things, not so successful things, that I was like, wow, I would really like to write about that. That's a real issue that's on my heart, that I would like to impart in terms of how this could be fixed, or what might this be about, or how could we grow from that? So that was a motivation for me, was to sort of reflect back on the things I've seen, and also the areas that, from my experience, I've seen nonprofits struggle with, board members struggle with, staff members struggle with, and trying to put out a helping hand, maybe to offer some tips and suggestions for how to avoid some of those pitfalls. So that's sort of what motivated us to collaborate on this. And I have to say, it has been really great, because we both come from similar backgrounds, in the sense of our whole lives working in nonprofits. but we come from different backgrounds, and that I've always been on the side of the seeking the money. I come from the fundraising side. And in my consulting work, a lot of it has been around fundraising, although now I'm doing much more strategic planning and mergers and things like that. Whereas Lou's been on the other side for much of his life, and making on the grant making side. So we sort of felt we sort of balanced each other off in our different perspectives. From his standpoint of saying, this is what grant makers need. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And this is what nonprofits struggle to do. So how do we bring those two together? And that part has been a lot of fun.
I'd like to, we get a question sometimes, why did we choose the title for the book, Nonprofit Excellence Strategies for a Challenging World? And one reason is, nonprofit excellence is in the title because that's what both of us are all about in terms of what we do in the field in consulting and in the positions we've held in our careers. So that's why that is. And Strategies for a Challenging World is part of the title because the world is increasingly depending on nonprofits, we feel, to provide services and to supplement the underfunded public services, so that it's a challenging world from that standpoint. We also live in a world that's has ever increasing needs, and as all of you who are on the Zoom this morning providing services can attest to. And the nonprofits, because we're being depended upon so much, need to be nimble, need to be flexible, and need to be practicing best practices so that the nonprofit agencies, we feel, can be in existence for an indefinite period of time into the future. So that's kind of my take on what the title meant and why we chose that title. Connie, do you want to add to that?
Well, no, I think that's exactly it, is that we are recognizing, we all know this is a challenging world. It's ever changing. I often comment, despite the many new ways there are to communicate and to get your message across, I think it's more difficult than ever. Yeah, we've got 15 different ways. You've got social media and you've got print and you've got this and you've got that, but it's really hard to capture people's attention. So that whole element continues to be challenging. So it is challenging. We've got fiscal challenges, and certainly the last year has presented us all with boats of totally unforeseen brand new challenges, which also require us to be sort of flexible and on our games, and it shows up. I think the last year has shown up, also illuminated any weaknesses that some nonprofits had. There were too many nonprofits who in the start of COVID didn't have technology capable of handling the transition from office to home, is an example. So it continues to be challenging.
Yeah.
So maybe I was just going to say, before we get too further in, maybe talking about some of the topics in the book, are there any particular areas that you're interested in that you'd like to talk about this morning? So Terry Moran is saying capacity building grants. She'd like us to talk about capacity building grants and how they differ from normal grants. So that's something we can toss over to Lou for sure.
Sure. Capacity building grants are extremely important in my view, and increasingly in the view of others of my former colleagues running other foundations. Sometimes a funder, first of all, likes the organization, but in the pursuit of excellence, feels that they need to build their capacity, whether it be in fund development or strategic planning or board development. And a capacity building grant can very often be as valuable as an outright grant that was originally asked for. And I wouldn't say on numerous occasions, but on some occasions, an organization would come to us and ask for XYZ number of dollars for general operating support or for a special program. But it was determined, that they really need help to get stronger. and it was a better investment for us. And that's the way funders look at the grants, by the way, as really an investment in the organization, investment in the community that they're serving, and investment in the clients that they're serving. So that the best way in given situations is for a capacity building grant as a pathway to a regular, I'll call it a regular grant of a general operating support or a project grant.
Did that answer your question, Terry? I know she's muted, but
is there a difference in the way you go about applying for it, or in the kind of data that's needed for it?
Just based on my experience, the answer to your first part of your question was no. There was no at the Phoenixville Community Health Foundation or at the Stewart Huston Charitable Trust that I was at before that. There was no separate process, and the reason was that, you know, in all my foundation experiences, I always made it a high priority to meet personally with the people representing the organizations who were asking for the money. And out of that conversation, we learn a lot. And it could be that, you know, the organization came in asking for, I don't know, let's say $20,000 for a general operating support, but it became apparent that they really needed a lot of work in order to build their capacity in some area before it became a solid investment for us, philanthropic investment. So, you know, we would start discussing a capacity building grant at that stage.
I think another challenge or another issue with capacity building grants too to think about is not all funders make them. And so you have to really do your grant research to find funders who understand the value of capacity building. Not everyone does. And it is, and how important it can be in terms of helping you go to another level. And that's actually an area that I touched in a little bit in that article that actually both Lou and I worked on together, the for-profits and nonprofits article, the one that contrasts. There's an article in the book that sort of compares and contrasts the way for-profit organizations operate and the way nonprofits operate. Because there certainly are significant differences. And in writing that book, we interviewed a number of people, Moira being one. Thank you, Moira. Shout out to you, who contributed some input and good thoughts into that. But typically, you often find what I learned from people from the for-profit sector is they're often willing to bring in outside experts and outside people to help them figure something out in the for-profit world. It's just considered that's what you do. But for nonprofits to, come up with a few $1,000s or whatever it might be, to bring it's a whole thing. It's a whole consideration. And so that's why a lot of times in nonprofits, we scrounge to try to find things for free and to try to get, do it ourselves. Well, maybe a board member can figure it out. And that's why these capacity building grants are so wonderful, because they can make that happen.
Yeah, another aspect of that, excuse me, from a funder's perspective is that, if you go into a funder and say, look, I'm not here to actually ask for a direct service type grant. We realize that our organization, our board has realized it, the staff has realized that we really need to improve in certain areas. So the biggest need that we have now is to build our capacity in whatever area it happens to be for your organization. And that can be impressive because that tells a funder that, you're not only interested in getting money, but you're interested in becoming the best organization that you can possibly be, that you appreciate the pursuit of excellence, and you appreciate that you need to be what I call a learning organization, and that you have a learning culture in your organization. And that can be very impressive to a funder.
Any other questions at this point that maybe you were, as you were thinking about coming on to joining this group today, you thought, wow, I really want to hear about this, or hope you cover that. Anything else coming to mind at this point? Feel free throughout to, put it in the text or offer a suggestion. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
If there are no questions, I'd like to just pose something myself. In the book, and toward the beginning of the book, it is page 2, actually. There's an essay called Philanthropy, the Broader View. And for those of you who have purchased the book already, I know that some of you have and have read it. What do you think about that? Do you think it's valid? Do you think it's hokey to think of philanthropy in broader terms than just money and volunteerism?
Yeah, I think Lou's point in writing that article was that so many times when we hear the word philanthropy, we either think, oh, that's something that only like super, super wealthy people do. And it's definitely attached to giving money or building a building with your name on it, or that's philanthropy. And right. And Lou's concept of it, which I think is so cool, is that it's like, it's also volunteerism. It's also giving a kind word to someone, or helping somebody carry groceries, or whatever it might be. It can be small things as well. And he talks about, you know, the value of that in terms of, you know, building a helpful, healthy society, really. So yeah, wondering if you guys in nonprofits have any thoughts about that bigger picture of philanthropy at all.
I will just jump in
Yeah,
and say
please.
that my world before this particular position at VEP was always in the corporate environment.
Mhm.
So philanthropy to me was always money giving. Do you know what I mean? And that
Yeah.
could be just associated with the people that could afford to do it. And then in the last company I worked for, we did a lot of giving back in terms of volunteerism. And I saw how worthwhile that could be. But still in my head, philanthropy was giving money. And then when I joined VEP, I learned that philanthropy is giving anything. And it really is. And that's how I feel about it. And that's why it's such a worthwhile endeavor for me. That's
That
my
is,
2 cents.
I think that's a beautiful statement. Philanthropy is giving anything. I really love that.
Yeah, and that's really, you put it very nicely and succinctly, Donna. You know, that was the idea about the broader view, is that it could be anything, because the root of the word is the love of mankind. That's what philanthropy means. And you could express love of mankind in many, many, many different ways. And then I try to pick out 2 of them, additional ways, kindness and compassion. So thank you for your endorsement of that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Lou
Terry.
and Connie, can I just add one more comment to that?
Please.
Thank you, Donna. And I hear that from Donna a lot, so it makes me feel good that she
Yeah,
can share that out. And I think we often in the philanthropy development world have often thought that it's always sort of top down, that we're doling it out, we're handing it out. What I've experienced, not only in this position at VEP, is watching, for better, you know, use of the word, as client, those who we are here for, they give back. So the philanthropy network isn't just our organizational service, but we improve their lives through what we do. But what they do is give back their time to us to be ambassadors on behalf of the program. They can give their money, but you often see our adult learners doing things in the community, planting trees, getting involved in conservancy, getting involved in organizations elsewhere in the community that really taps their lifelong experience. So if they were engineers or you know, a professional in another country, they're now taking their English skills and now they're moving into our communities in a more interactive way. So I think there's, and right down to even delivering candies and flowers to the office, you know, they're always thanking us. So their philanthropy, you know, in those gestures, but they become our interpreters when they get to a level, then they can help Donna navigate the next, you know, the next interview. So I think philanthropy if we could take on the perspective that it's just a broader network. It's not just the service organization giving it down to someone, but building someone up and building all of us up in terms of a quality life that we all live in our community. You know, it sounds cliche, but we all get stronger because of that strength.
Mhm.
Well said,
Yeah.
Terry.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you bringing in your program participants, talking about them, because I think many times as nonprofits, we get focused on serving people. And especially if we're in the arena of serving people who have limited resources in whatever way they are, that we forget that they have a need to give back too, that everybody benefits from giving back. And exactly, and your programs can grow so much by including their voices. So knowing that they have a role too in helping to further the work that you do and the things that they benefit from, but also the greater community too. It's huge. It's sort of like you get rolling with this, and it builds on itself in a really positive way. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions?
At this point, yeah. Lou, I know that one of the things that you're most interested in, I think, in nonprofits is furthering collaborations among nonprofits, helping them to communicate and share resources with each other, even to the point of mergers at various times. What are some of your major thoughts about considering collaborations?
Well, I think my bottom line answer is I think we need more of it. That there's not enough of that in the nonprofit sector. I know during my time at the Phoenixville Community Health Foundation, the need for more collaboration was a topic that came up in one form or another at almost every board meeting among the board members, who are very conscious about duplication of services. Board members tend to be people who come from the business world by and large, who are into the concept of efficiency and lack of duplication, or not to duplicate services. So yes, it's a very important topic. I think nonprofit organizations ought to look for more opportunities to do that. Doesn't necessarily have to be mergers, but collaborating in some way, whether it's in a common fundraising campaign or collaborating on providing a service. When you go to a funder and say, we are going to be collaborating with these other two agencies, we're going to be the lead agency in this, but we're in this particular project, but we're collaborating with agency A and agency B, and we're all going to have defined roles. That speaks loudly to a funder, because again, you show that you're conscious about the issue of duplication of services, and you're conscious about the need for collaboration. So pretty much, but let me just say this too: when organizations collaborate, it's not a matter of just calling up the other agency and said, hey, you want to get together and do something. There has to be, how can I put it, it has to be a good marriage, put it that way. They have to come from similar service delivery cultures. They have to make sure that it's a fair collaboration on both parts, if it's two agencies. That there are no hidden agendas, that everything's up front, and that it obviously has the support of the board and the staff, or else the collaboration will not work. And in many cases, a memorandum of understanding is not out of order in developing a collaboration with another organization, so that it's clearly understood the roles and responsibilities of each party.
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of collaborations. I think we all have. Is there anyone in particular, anybody here who has a collaboration ongoing or has done one in the past that has worked well for you that you'd like to share? Does anybody have one that didn't work well? Anybody have a collaboration nightmare story? Because there are some out there for sure.
Or is there anybody who doesn't believe in collaboration in the first place and make,
At
you know,
Thorncroft, we do some collaboration with some of the organizations in our area who support individuals with specialized needs, whether it be school programs or Bryn Mawr Rehab is one of our collaborators, as well as Woodland School, Warnleaf Camp. So a number of organizations where we are a supplement to their curriculum,
right.
and that allows to, you know, to enhance their curriculum and the experience of the clients and students that they serve, and an added experience. So we do collaborate in that way to enhance their curriculum, as well as have, you know, to broaden our scope of service as well. So that's something that we've done for a number of years, and always are looking for those partnerships that, as you mentioned, there's not enough of us out here to do everything alone. So working together enhances everyone's service of their mission.
Yeah, and I think, Michaela, that I think Thorncroft it's an equestrian center. And for those of you who didn't know, but I think that's a really great example, because you offer a program that is not easily duplicated. Let's face it, you know, you've got the infrastructure, you've got everything you need. And so for example, I am familiar with the summer camp out here, Bournleaf Special Camp. They have a beautiful summer camp. It's a day camp for kids. There's no way they could add horses and stables and people onto their property and into have their own little program. So taking the kids to Thorncroft is a fabulous collaboration. As Michaela said, it allows them to offer an experience they could otherwise never have. And they're collaborating with another equally fabulous organization, Thorncroft. So there's no question about the quality. So that's a really nice example, I think, of a real win-win, where you've got the summer camp does what they do really well, but they don't do what Thorncroft does. Thorncroft does what they do really well. They don't do what the summer camp does, but together it's a beautiful opportunity for people. Anybody else have a collaboration story, positive or negative, or experience?
I can say on behalf of the library, we have been collaborating for years with many organizations in the Phoenixville area in terms of being able to give them a voice in programs like this one today on Zoom, in starting conversations on topics from the environment to race in Black history. You know, Phoenixville is blessed with so many wonderful nonprofit organizations, social service organizations, and we feel that, you know, we can help them become more visible in the community through formats, forums like the programs we offer in person, hopefully once again soon, and on Zoom. So we've definitely enjoyed that, all the organizations we've been able to promote and work with over the years here at the library.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, that's a great example, because I would say everybody knows about the Phoenixville Public Library, but not everyone knows about whatever agency or person, or like this situation here this morning, not everybody knows about this. So it's a great way for your other agencies and services to get more exposure through the draw that you have as the public library. Yeah.
Right.
We say we're more than books, and that's
right.
how we intend to show it. Yeah.
And you are. Yeah. And I would say something else just about collaborations that's really important, because there are, you know, people have different challenging situations with them. It's really important to, as Lou said, to have laid out clearly who's going to do what, and is there going to be, you know, resources, who's going to supply what, and to be really clear with that. It's also really important as you go along to sit back and evaluate the progress of the collaboration. So
Good
that, you know, like after say 6 months or depending on how long it is or whatever, you know, to go, are we doing okay here? Just to really be willing to have that conversation. So that if there is a problem, it doesn't go on so long that you end up getting like, well, like I've heard from people like, well, that didn't work because they didn't do X. And I said, well, did you tell your other partner that they weren't doing X or that was your expectation? He's like, no, we didn't talk about it. It's like, well, no. So it's real important to have the willingness, and it can be challenging, but to have the willingness to check in with each other regularly to make sure things are working the way you want them to. And if changes need to be made, you can adjust.
That's an excellent, Connie, and I'm really glad you brought it up. Too often when programs and collaborations are instituted, there isn't an assessment element or an evaluation element built into it. And, you know, it could be something simple as just getting together periodically. At the foundation, you know, for years, we've had the Ride for Health initiative. And we made it a point, trying to practice this point. We made it a point to get together with the groups at least once a quarter, who were like, we had about 15 agencies who were members of the program for their clients. And out of those meetings, you know, we were able to tweak the program over the years and make improvements and changes that would benefit the clients and the agencies as well. So it's a critical point, and thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and Terry put in the chat that courage is part of the communication with partners. And I think absolutely that you put that, you really summed that up, because it does. It takes a lot of courage to be willing to say, you know, we love you and this isn't working right. You know, or we're disappointed, or could you do more or less or differently? But that's really what it takes in order to have a successful partnership.
One other thought, citizen advocacy where I work is involved in a collaboration called the Community Coalition, and it's very focused on collaborating around fundraising.
Mhm.
But any other collaborating we do is informal. So it was the idea of forming a collaboration with a very specific intent around one specific issue. And then the rest is still just informal, calling up so-and-so, you know, saying this is somebody that might be helped by you, but just an interesting example of a focused kind of collaboration rather than a overall.
That's a good example, and I'm glad you brought that up. So since you've had so much experience with it, and we're, I think, one of the founders of that coalition,
Right.
over the years, what would you say have been some of the advantages of it and maybe some of the challenges of the community coalition?
Well, the biggest advantage was by being a larger group, we were able to draw in donors from a broader geographic area with broader interests, because people can give one check and serve multiple interests. And that was an effective tool, and it has been successful in terms of being able to reach out beyond the sort of Chester County and even more local donor base. And that was really the initial intent, is why are we competing for funds when we could be going broader and together raising different money? So that's the main advantage. I think the challenges, part of the challenges are just that money's always a challenge, and we have a pretty loose model of how we share out the money based on kind of where an organization is at and what they need. Some years it's never an even split. It's based on what organizations ask for and so on and so forth. So over the years, certain members have become bigger and get a bigger piece of the pot, and that's all navigated. So that's the challenge around money, is just navigating what seems fair, if you will, because fair is pretty, I mean, we've had years where people give up a big chunk of their money because another organization needs it more.
Wow.
So you have to have a lot of trust, and you have to, and that develops over time, and everybody puts in some sweat equity. And again, that varies. So you're navigating people stuff like you always do. I would say that's probably always the challenge, but I think the advantages have well outweighed the challenges.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing. I wasn't aware that on occasion, some agencies would actually give up some money.
Oh, yeah.
That's quite a good sign of the coalition working very well.
Yeah.
Kudos to you and your coalition. Yeah. Was it a challenge that there was a diversity of types of organizations that are a part of the coalition?
No, that was actually a plus, because people who have multiple interests can give one check and be meeting housing needs, cultural needs, individual needs of people with disabilities. It's having the broad palette was a plus.
Yeah, that's a good point. Excellent. Yeah.
Can I ask, Maura, may I ask a question?
Mhm.
How did you come together to land that? Was there seed money?
No, it's actually a very
Or-
interesting story. There were a number of us who were involved in multiple organizations, all raising money for each organization and looking at each other and going, what are we doing? Why would we be going off to our separate corners to raise money when we're all the same sort of group? So that was initially, and we invited all the nonprofits in the greater Phoenixville area. I think the first meeting, there were almost 30 nonprofits. And we said, who's interested in this idea? But it came down to people being very nervous about sharing anything around money. It made people jumpy. And so we ended up initially with just 3 original groups who knew each other very, very well, and a 4th group that was part of that, but recognized they were actually so big that they didn't fit. They were out of scale, if you will, with the rest of us. So that was how it started. And then we deliberately wanted to grow. So over years, we've gone up to 6 members. Now we're down to 5. But that is a little bit fluid, and becoming a member is a pretty long process because there's a lot of trust that has to be built. But so that was how it started, was a wide open idea. Who wants to be part of this? And people were nervous. They were, sharing around money when that's all of us are knocking ourselves out for it is tough. So
Yeah.
So the important message that I take away not only is your trust and building together, but you're also building for the same community.
geographically,
Geographically.
And again, some of the members have a much broader reach. Colonial Theater is a member, and obviously they reach regionally. So,
Right.
but there was a certain centrality to the geography, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's the common thread.
Right. Thank you.
Mhm.
If there's no more discussion on coalitions and collaborations, I'd like to bring up the topic of term limits, board term limits.
This is a pet peeve of Lou's, I'm just going to say.
I make the case in the book for having term limits, but I'd be interested, since you are on the firing line there, so to speak, with your boards, whether you endorse that concept or whether you feel there should not be term limits.
I can jump in. We've gone back and forth on that a lot at Citizen Advocacy, and ultimately landed on not having term limits. And the reason was it takes so long to really get your hands around what citizen advocacy is. And by the time people were really getting dug into what the principles of it are and so on and so forth, they would be rotating off. And it felt like just such a terrible waste of that experience that people had to work to get. And so, and we've had some people who still do come on and serve one term, but we have some folks who've been there for a very long time, and they provide sort of an indispensable point of view that we would now hate to lose the wisdom they have to bring to it. And I know some organizations have people come off for a year and then come back on for another 2 terms, but we landed on nope, experience is too valuable and too hard won to just push away. So that's just one point of view where that's where we've landed.
Does anybody else have a point of view on that particular point?
I guess I'd want to ask Moira, how long were your terms for, and how long were your terms? And how many successive terms could a board member serve when you decided to abandon them?
We had 3-year terms and you could serve 2 consecutive.
Okay,
And now you can be unlimited.
you can be on forever. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Because one way to address that, I think there are, and I certainly hear what you're saying. One way to address that, which some organizations do, is they even allow, say, 3-year terms. So you would have potentially a 9-year span of serving with the year off and then potentially coming back. And there's certainly always the category of, ex officio or advisory board or, emeritus to consider also. But it's an interesting, and I think with something as maybe as complex as citizen advocacy is, that certainly seems like that was a good choice for you guys.
I see Terry Moran has a comment about this. Terry, you want to share it?
Oh, just that most of our board is relatively new. We have only 2 members who've been on more than 3 years, and coming up against term limits isn't so much of a problem as finding new board members.
Mm-hmm.
That's more of an issue for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Moira, have you ever run into the problem of somebody not fitting well on your board for personality reasons, for any reason whatsoever, and the person being disruptive in one way or another?
We have, and fortunately so far, generally they self-select away at the end of their term.
Mm-hmm.
So we have not had to say to anybody yet, this isn't a good fit. Because each person gets re-asked, every 3 years, and we're vaguely prepared for if we have to say that, but so far they have recognized it. So we're feeling a little bit like maybe we're dodging bullets so far on that. But
Yeah.
Interesting. Put it.
it's the risk for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you do it sounds like you do have a term, you get re-asked. So
Right.
that does give you an opportunity.
That's right.
Yeah. One person made the comment, it was interesting, that if you have the term limit, you have the terms, that serving a next term, another term, is an honor, it's not a right. So that meaning that, sometimes people think, well, I'm on for three terms, that's just what's going to happen. And it's like, no, it's like you have to be asked back. And I think often what nonprofits, again, most of us are somewhat confrontational averse. And the last thing you want to be in a position of doing is having to fire a volunteer, especially, which is tricky. But as Lou said, sometimes situations arise where that is in fact the best thing to do for the organization. So the term limit provides sort of an artificial structure, which makes it a little easier sometimes.
I have a question on that. I'm not on the board. I have really nothing to do with the board selection and the members. But if it's so hard to get quality board members, it's a tough decision to let any of them go at the end of a term,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
So then you're starting all over again with that same cycle of trying to get quality board members, and that can take a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Oh.
it can. And actually what that speaks to, one of the things, and then I'm sorry, Lou, you can jump in, is it speaks to the value of having standing committees in your organization. Committees, these are committees that meet on a regular basis that are an adjunct of the board, like a finance committee or a program committee, fundraising committee, human resources committee, having those standing committees comprising non-board members, so that you have at any given time, ideally, a pool of potential board members on your committees. And these are people that, because they're on your committee, you've had a chance to work with them, you know how good they are, you know how effective they are, they understand a certain amount about the work of the nonprofit, so they know whether they're passionate and interested in the work enough to maybe become a board member. And so that's often one fairly easy way to build yourself a pool of prospective board members. Because you're right, Donna, the last thing you want to do is have to ask someone to leave But if they're creating a problem, if they're not moving along with the direction the organization is moving, that can be a real problem. It can be worse than having the vacancy.
Right.
Connie, just to ask a question spinning off of that, at Thorncroft, we utilize our development committee as that, as that pipeline, in a sense, working closely with our governance committee, for when they find prospects and working them through our committee structure hopefully before welcoming them onto the board. So our executive director, myself, and our chair of our governance work closely in finding those prospects and working to cultivate them. What can, on the development committee side of things, how can we be helping set that pathway up for success and helping be a part of that chain? You have any advice on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you can do with your, and by development, you mean fundraising committee? Is that
Correct.
what you- development
And fundraising.
One of the things you can do is to create almost leadership opportunities for committee members who aren't board members. Create opportunities for them to take initiative and actually do some work on behalf of the organization. And that's often one of the nice things about standing committees, is that they're not so much advisory roles as a board would be. They're more roll up your sleeves and do work. And so giving people leadership roles or encouraging them to take the lead in certain things on a committee, then I think helps to get them, if they're willing to do that, helps to get them more invested in the work of the organization. So then they begin to think of themselves more as a leader, which would then transition fairly smoothly into becoming a board member who is also a leader, certainly. Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely. And I think the other piece that we look to do is help to establish that culture within, from the get-go in our committees. And, any advice on that would be helpful as well. And how do you establish the culture of your organization and that dynamic between, board, staff, and committee from the get-go, so they're successful as well in that transition?
Yeah, and it's really too many times I see committees used sort of as like, the staff go to the committee and they report endlessly on what they're doing. And the committee members sit there and they go, oh, that sounds good. Or that sounds nice. Or that, and it's basically reports. And they say, well, what's your opinion about this? What's your opinion about that? And they give their opinions maybe, or some advice, but there's very little, we need you to do this. We need you to take a lead on that. We need you to build another potential group of major donors. We need you to host a cultivation event for donors. And this is, come on, we need somebody to take the lead and bring your friends and let's do this, or whatever it might be we need you to go with you to go visit a major donor, for example. It doesn't have to be the executive director and the board chair all the time. We need you to step in, do this, step up and help lead. And that not only, again, builds these leadership skills and this desire to get a little more ingrained in the organization, it's inspiring and interesting for the committee member, because they're no longer sitting there going, yeah, this is a great report. I sound like I'm sort of being humorous about it, but I've seen it. I've seen it with organizations with fundraising committees that it takes staff 4 days to get ready for the committee meeting because they're producing, reports the size of an Empire State Building. And then the committee members sit there and look at the report. And are we surprised that fundraising is a problem for that organization? So the standing committees are great opportunities to build leaders.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, Michaela, the committees are extremely important, and the work of the committees really ought not to be just kind of haphazard in the respective areas, whether it's human resources or fundraising or governance or whatever, but ought to be an extension of the organization's strategic plan. So the overall strategic plan ought to be kind of like an umbrella, if you will, and the work of the committees would be on implementing different aspects of the strategic plan. So I'll just, since we're talking about fundraising, let's say the fundraising committee every year there ought to be 2 or 3 goals that the fundraising committee has. And it's the job of the chairperson of that fundraising committee to make sure that work is done in a focused kind of organized way, so that when they make reports at the board meetings, which all the committees should be making reports at the board meetings, that things could be perceived as, operating in a positive way going forward. Another part of your question, I think, and on a page in the appendix, I think it's page 177, is about charters. Each of the committees, we highly recommend that committees have charters, and the charter basically outlines what the mission of that particular committee is, what the responsibilities are of that committee, stemming from the mission, and who are the members of that committee. It just gives authenticity, and I think it gives the people who are assigned or volunteer for a committee, I think it makes them take it a little bit more seriously. And the other part of your question, I think, has to do with recruiting, and another part of the appendix, I think it's forget what page it's on, but has to do with matrix. And I think we provide in the appendices 2 matrices about how to select board members and make sure that there's enough diversity from a demographic standpoint, but also that there's enough professional expertise. That's the other matrix. And to make sure that you've got people who are going to be workers, and not just like to attend meetings for the sake of attending meetings.
Something else about committees is that they do certainly take staff time. They do take work. There's no question about that. But what we've seen and experienced directly is that the benefits far outweigh that investment, that it really is an investment, a good investment. And that committees, that there's also, as Lou said, committees are advisory to the board in that they don't make decisions themselves per se. I mean, yeah, they might decide on what color the napkin's going to be, and approve an invitation or something. You don't make policy decisions. The board does that. So it's important, as Lou said, in that committee charter, which is basically like a job description of what the committee does. It's real important to be very clear about that, so you don't end up with a committee that becomes like this monster. And those can happen too. I've seen that, where it's like, they want to go against the board policies or against the advice of the executive director, and they become sort of like, we've got to do this. We have to do that. We want to do it this way. I don't care if you want to do it. It's like, no, so that there's controls there. And that also speaks towards clear communication. So that if you see, and it can happen where, humans do this, you see a committee or a group going off, veering off a little bit, you have to be sure to bring them back and talk about it, get them back in line.
I could add something that we implemented, first of all, a few years ago, and Lou was at the beginning of this, our first advisory council, which was an adjunct to the board, which I still think is a fabulous way of us as an organization, small board, being able to keep our finger on the pulse, kind of keeping us on this slow and steady path forward. And it gives us a chance to hear from professionals that represent. So sometimes we don't have all of the expertise on the board that we need, but the advisory council adds an extra level of that. Again, they're not policy producing, but they give us feedback. They helped us with our SWOT analysis when we started our strategic plan. So I think they were invaluable, and keeping that group intact and fresh is part of that rotation and recruitment. So we build on that. The second thing that I would say that I've enjoyed as an executive director that was put in place a couple of years ago is, and it really came from board members saying, well, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. because you'll have those board members, you know, as much mentoring as you give a board member or encouragement or information, they still come back with, well, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And that's very frustrating for an ED. It's frustrating for a board president, especially if someone's already in their first year, well in, and they still don't know what they're supposed to be doing. That's, you know, that's a conversation that we all have to have. But we created a 3-year, a one-term expectations sheet. And it just helped us define for ourselves, and I think we can always improve on it. But, you know, what if, as a new board member, are you bringing to the organization in the first year? What's your, you know, maybe that's a bring all of your Amway people, bring your Rolodex, bring all your new friends to the experience. The second year, you start to be deeper involved in leading a committee or taking a role that's, you know, a little bit higher level. And then by third year, you're either thinking about an executive level, so that your next term, which we hope by then they're really engaged, then they start their second 3-year term, they're in a leadership position and they're recruiting and they're bringing in. So when we put that down in writing, it helped me as an ED to say, when someone gives me feedback from the board, I go back to that sheet and say, well, where are you at in your lifespan on this board? Because, you know, I'm fine with bringing someone on the first year who's never been on a board. This is our training ground, but we needed some framework. And then, of course, then there's always the benefit of having someone who's been on other boards, but sometimes they bring that old baggage with them. And so just because we don't do it the same way that, you know, the United Way board does it, there's advantages and disadvantages, but we learn from that experience. But I think both a council and a 3-year, or at least whatever your term is, to have a progressive expectation from those board members. So instead of waiting for the third year to ask them to renew, after the first year, where are we at? Are you ready now to take that next step? Are you now going to be the chair of the committee, or are you going to be, you know, a co-chair of an initiative or what have you, before they get to the end of their term? And then you realize 3 years have gone by and they haven't really felt productive, or we have not gotten enough out of them from what we originally intended.
I'd like to, excellent points. I'd like to add to that. I think what Terry said is absolutely correct, but it could even actually start sooner than that, and that's at the recruiting stage. To recruit somebody and have them understand why you're recruiting them. What job do you want them to do? If you're recruiting somebody, you should be recruiting people for board positions because of a certain expertise or a certain, maybe they have a certain fundraising contacts or whatever it is. At the recruiting stage, make it explicitly known why they're being recruited and what job, so to speak, in quotes, you want them to do. The second thing is, with new board members, it may be a good idea, and some organizations I know are starting to do this, of having a mentor, a board member mentor who's already a veteran on the board, to kind of hook up, if you will, with a new board member, so that there's somebody that new board member can rely on and ask questions for. They may not be, they may be too shy to ask questions in a board meeting, but to their mentor, the new board member would be more willing to ask questions of things that they're not sure of or confused about or whatever.
Folks, we are an hour into the presentation, and it's really been great. I've been glad that this has turned into the discussion that it has today. But we value your time. And so Connie and Lou, I'd like to ask as a way of wrapping up, if you can each give us an important takeaway from your book.
Oh, that's a surprise question, Mark.
Well, I'll go first if you want to think. My takeaway would be just what the title says, nonprofit excellence, is that to, appreciate the importance of best practices in running nonprofit organizations and in governing nonprofit organizations. And the takeaway is to try to instill a learning environment in the culture of your organization, and to be always pursuing excellence. You know, it's an ethereal thing sometimes, but the fact that you're pursuing excellence, I think, will show that you're a learning culture in your nonprofit organization.
Yeah, and thanks, Lou. And I think I would just say that I think one of the things that my goal with working on the book was it's really a handbook of pretty much a wide variety of topics that are furthering you to ask questions about what you do, to look at what you're doing. It's not necessarily, oh, that's what they think we should be doing. It's a question of asking you to, is what we're doing working? To be willing to question, to be willing to try to doing things differently. And it really is a handbook on pretty much a wide range of topics that are concerns of nonprofits today, and has some handy tools in the back that you might find useful.
Also, if I could just make one quick thing on that. There's probably, if you look at this book and everything that's in it, there are thousands of dollars worth of consulting in here.
Yes, indeed.
For 19. There are, in the appendices, there are 23 different tools that could be used. So I just like to make that kind of known and explicit that there is a lot of valuable, practical, proven input in the book. As up on the screen there, you can see if you're interested in multiple copies, there are significant discounts for multiple copies.
Yeah, and just a shout out to the volunteer English program. Thank you for purchasing it for your board.
Yes, appreciate
That's
that.
awesome.
Our pleasure. And everyone took their copy, and Terry has us all on track for hopefully a meeting with you in the summer.
Great.
So we can have a real personal, I just want to add a note of thanks because you both walk the walk. And I know it sounds like I'm blowing smoke. I say this to Lou all the time. One of the best things that I've experienced as an ED is having a relationship with a foundation that's willing to sit in the office, talk about, and be vulnerable, to be able to work through a challenge, and be able to say to a funder, we need help, we want to do this or that, and being connected with other people, feeling a part of a community. And I think Phoenixville really is a testament to that kind of relationship. That's why Maura, your effort works so well. I think that's why Tamala and the Truth Philanthropy concept is launching so well, because it is a very trusting community. And Mark is our natural partner from VEP. We can't be in Phoenixville without the library. And hopefully we bring a lot of people into Mark's world that he might not have engaged before. So you all walk the walk, and I thank you for that. It really is a wonderful relationship.
Well, thank you for your very kind.
Thank you.
Yes,
Sorry.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Everyone had a chance to copy down the ordering information for the book. Okay.
Thank you for your time, everyone. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining.
Connie, Lou, thank you so much for sharing today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
Cheers.
you
Bye.
all.
Take
Thank
good
Thank you.
care.
Bye-bye.
For the rest of your day,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you. Take care now.
Bye.